Welcome to another edition of Exit Philosophy with Mal Ramanan and myself, and plenty to talk about this week. We've got the flight to Newport Beach by
I'll
the
jump
Blue
you when you say
Jays.
flights.
We'll talk about that. The trip to L.A. to woo Scott Boras on Juan Soto coming to Toronto. We'll talk about that later, but I want to start with a surprise announcement that was made just this past week in terms of Matt Hague, who was an assistant hitting coach with the Blue Jays, highly regarded. He had applied for the hitting coach job after Guillermo Martinez was let go, and it was given to a 34-year-old
Not
coach
a kid, Rod.
from
In
from
our
the
world.
from Minnesota Twins who had been let go by Minnesota. So I know you have some feelings on that about Matt Hague and why. I mean, we're trying to wonder why he didn't get that job, but what were your thoughts on that?
I was shocked when he didn't get the job, obviously with the Jays. You know, he was highly regarded, and a lot of guys in that clubhouse I know, and you know as well, Rich. I'm sure you've got a couple people you can reference. Really loved Matt, and it was my impression that he had a lot to do with Vladdy turning it around this year, and there was a real camaraderie there. And when they moved on from Guillermo, which I don't think anybody was surprised with the performance, et cetera, et cetera, I just assumed Haig was kind of in line for that job. And when they turned to someone outside the organization that I'm not sure they really had a connection with in the first place. I'm not surprised he's gone at this stage, but for me, I don't know how you feel, but to me, it's quite a surprise. Now, I mean, we could debate the value of the multiple hitting coach approach and et cetera. But to me, I just felt like within the clubhouse, he was highly regarded. And I don't know if that got overlooked or what happened. Obviously, there's something I'm missing there, but I don't know what you thought about it, but that's certainly the thing that struck me.
Well, for me, it was the fact that a large percentage of the Blue Jays offense and hope for the future was based on the Buffalo boys and their progress through the system and into the major leagues and their knowledge of the strike zone and their ability to work a count. And Spencer Horwitz leading among those, and he swore by Matt Hague. I mean, you'd see him on TV pregame. He'd be working with guys early in the afternoon with a bunch of contraptions that looked like they came out of the dungeon of a dominatrix. But the
Is that how
maybe
you perceived it?
that's how I perceived it. I've never been in the dungeon, but I've heard.
I mean, good move, though. Good move. Yes.
But the thing about
Or
that
so I
is
had read, as they say.
maybe in this day and age of analysis and analytics and uh, just reviewing video, that this method that he was using of hands-on and the cult of personality wasn't working within the Blue Jays front office. But like if Spencer Horwitz swears by him and you're thinking maybe this guy could be a starting player, whether it's at DH or second base, um, then why get rid of the guy that was his mentor in terms of hitting? So that's what I don't understand. For a guy whose Minnesota Twins down the stretch in August and September reflected what the Blue Jays were doing in terms of failing in certain situations. So I don't know what the connection was with the guy from Minnesota, Hopkins. Um, but I could see why Matt Hague would choose to go to Pittsburgh because that's a team that drafted him. He split his minor league time between the Blue Jays organization, but mostly with the Pirates. And I could see why he would go there if he had already been passed over.
Well, and there's probably a connection with the front office as well. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
And hey, you can argue about the quality of those Buffalo boys, you know, and whether I don't think anybody regarded them as potential major leaguers even a couple of years ago. Those guys that have come up, they've all had some positive impact. Like, do I think they're going to be major league starters? I don't think so. But the fact that they have the approach they do and perform to the level they have at times, even going back to, you know, the Babe, you know what I mean, Schneider, they've all had some level of success there. And how do you not attribute some of that to Matt Hague? You
Yeah,
know,
and
and
for
they
those who
do.
weren't aware, Matt Hague had been the hitting coach in Buffalo before he was brought up for a late
Right.
season stint, and then as a full-time second hitting coach or third hitting coach or fourth hitting coach, whatever he was, depending on
He
depending on
moved up the ranks this year,
yeah,
that's for sure.
depending, yes, in terms of trust,
Yeah.
in terms of the circle of trust within the clubhouse, there were more young hitters going to see him than there were, for example, going to see Guillermo Martinez.
Well, and from what I gather, some of the older hitters as well. And I think it's a story that's going to be worth following as well as they move on and see where the Pirates go. It's to me, it's just a surprise, not surprised that they left, obviously,
Yeah.
at this point. But
So what was the clue that you felt that Vlad Guerrero Jr. was being affected by Matt Hague? I mean, what signs did you see of that?
well, Vladdy's approach changed, and you know some of the comments I've heard outside of this as well. And if you follow how Vladdy interacted, even in looking in the dugout, who he was interacting with as far as hitting
Yeah,
coaches and personnel, it became Matt Hague all the time.
yeah,
When he had success, he would go down and talk to Matt, and they would talk. And obviously, there was a lot of work being done, and clearly, Vladdy turned it around. And he had a different approach where he just wasn't yanking balls into the left field all the time, and talking about hitting screamers that are ground balls for outs. He changed his approach, and Matt, from what I gathered, was a part of that. And you could just see the interaction they had. That clearly he was the guy he was talking to more than anybody else. That's
yeah.
to
And
me.
after
If you're
after
paying attention.
talking to Matt Hague after an at bat, he would go down to the end of the dugout, and if Edwin Encarnacion was there, he would talk to him. But
Yep,
we don't know if it was necessarily as much about hitting as he did with Matt Hague. You knew when he talked to Matt Hague, it was going to be about hitting. With Edwin, it could have been a lot of things. I mean,
could have
but
been post game plans.
that's
Post
both
game
sides.
plans. Sure.
But that's both sides of the equation, the mental side and the physical side. And Edwin, I'm sure, was very important for both. And Matt Hague, with all his apparati that he used, um, was
In the
I'm sure,
dungeon.
yeah, I'm sure that he had an influence on the mental side, but just his techniques and his improvement with those Buffalo boys was significant and obvious.
No
So
question.
now Marc Tramuta, Marc Tramuta was brought
Right.
in from the New York Mets to replace Shane Farrell, who had been there since the start of the 2020 season. And the 2020 to 24 drafts in 85 rounds had produced one major leaguer, and that was Austin Martin, who was included in the Jose Barrios and didn't make it to the majors till this year. But I know it's early for 23 and 24 prospects to be making it to the major leagues. But 1 in 85 is the lowest. I think it was tied with the Phillies for the lowest production. And the Phillies, we know, go outside the organization and they sign free agents and they make trades. But what were your thoughts on Marc Tramuta? He was there with the Blue Jays from 2003 to 12, went to the Mets in 13 because Ricciardi hired him in Toronto, and then Ricciardi was assistant GM
Right.
in New York. So we assume that connection took him to the Mets. And after a couple of years as a cross-checker, he became the scouting director for the Mets. And his 6 drafts produced 15 major league players. So That's a reasonable amount. Some pretty good major league players. Um, and so I think it's a good idea to bring him back. Someone in the organization that I respect told me that he is perfect choice because he mixes tradition with the new school, with the analytics, and he respects and uses both sides of the scouting equation. So I think there's no downside to that. Uh, three of the top three of the top 15 prospects in the Blue Jays' current organization, according to MLB Pipeline, were from last year's Blue Jays draft, were from the 2024 draft. And Tramuta was already back in the organization as an assistant, and I'm sure that he had some input in that. And the three pitchers. So with that in mind and looking ahead to 25 and beyond, I think it's a good move for the Blue Jays. It's a good hire.
Well, it's hard not to think that way anyways. I mean, right. I mean, there's, like you say, the 2023-24, you can't judge it yet. And I don't know if it's a good thing that those guys are in the top 15 or a bad thing.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean
there's
the
obviously lots of room
farm
for guys
system's
to move
ranked
in.
25th or 26th, so that's like being the tallest midget. So
That's right. So, I mean, we'll see how that filters out. But I mean, and that's unfortunate. Clearly, the focus for this organization was on this minor league system, and there's just very little to point to that say that it's gone well or been a success. So I think at this stage, any move is has to be seen as a good move. And I do know, I mean, I'm not going to tell you I know Mark well at all. I mean, obviously he was around when I was around, but our interaction with scouts isn't much. And I just know he was respected. Clearly, you don't get to this level now without having, being highly regarded. So I think his history with the club and having left the club, I think is probably a good thing. He probably brings a lot of other experience. And like you said, if he marries the two things, I think that's probably what you need. And it's more about building out the staff as well, right? At the end of the day, uh, you know, it's how he operates that entire scouting operation that's going to lead to success. So I don't think there's a downside at all. And it's just, it can only go up from here at this point anyway. So,
yeah, I think just looking at the way the Blue Jays handle their 40-man roster down the stretch in the final 2 months of the season, with all of those pitching waiver claims they were just rolling the dice, they were just throwing stuff against the wall to see what stuck, and like that's an embarrassment for your minor league
you don't
organization.
want to be in that position.
You're bringing in 26 to 32 year olds, 26 to 30 year olds, and hoping that one of them shows you something and throws 95 to 98 and then has a good secondary pitch that he can throw for strikes. And to do that sends a message to the rest of your minor league system who's looking up going, oh my God, I've been here 4 years and this is what they're doing. They're going outside the organization. They think nothing of what I can bring to the table. So
The Seattle Pilots at that stage, like
yeah.
what minor league system? Obviously, it's you just don't want to be in that position. That's for sure. So, if I'm Tramuta, I've taken the job at the right time. That's for sure. So,
Yeah, for sure. A
so
low bar.
yeah, low bar.
And then we're, as expected, the Jays are being included in the Juan Soto sweepstakes at least in the initial rankings, and they're being ranked right up there. In fact, I think they're the leadoff hitters, if reports are correct. They're leadoff hitters to fly across the country to go to Newport Beach, the Pleasure Palace offices of Scott Boras, and talk about Juan Soto. They're the leadoff hitters, and then the Mets and the Yankees and the Red Sox would be second, the Mets and the Yankees. And since the Dodgers are already in LA, there needs to be no announcement that this is going to happen. I mean, it could happen anytime. It may have happened already where the Dodgers are going to meet with Scott Boras. And the clue with the Dodgers is that they've already told Mookie Betts that he's going back to the infield,
Right.
which leaves a corner outfield spot open. And Teoscar is not even signed. So that leaves two corner outfield spots open. And one of them probably is slated to be Teoscar.
You
And
would
the
think
other
so.
one,
It's
it
slated
seems
to be Juan Soto.
obvious. It seems obvious that Juan Soto would be on their wish list. What are your thoughts regarding the cross country flight, which is the opposite direction of what happened last year with Shohei Ohtani flying on the eve of the winter meetings in Nashville, flying into Tampa and limoing across to the PDC and sitting down with Ross Atkins and Marc Shapiro and others and checking out the workout facilities. And at the same time, his interpreter was putting a bet on LA. But
That's right.
but
Right, likely landing spots, right?
but I mean the odds were low, but if you know,
If you know, they're not never be low enough.
so like your thoughts on this being out there in the Twitter sphere that the Jays are leading off.
Well, I think it's out there. uh, In my experience, Rich, and probably yours, it's out there on purpose, and it's the master plan of one set agent that's out there who's trying to make sure that the world knows who's coming and who's going, and the more people involved, at the end of the day, he's got one goal to get his client the most money in the spot he wants to go, obviously. So there's a reason that information's out there, and I actually think in this case it's probably accurate that these meetings are taking place. Now, once you get that information out there, here comes everybody else out of the woodwork to talk about the Toronto Blue Jays and their desperation and how they're a major player in this sweepstakes. And I find that a bit absurd. Just having gone through this and seeing how this works, you're already seeing it everywhere. I mean, it's conversation. We've talked about this before. It's a conversation with not only fans and wannabe insiders, the actual people who presume to be insiders, who whether they are or not, are obviously all over this because you can't sit idly by and not comment on it. So, they've got the Jays as a major player in this market, and as we've discussed, I mean, I just don't see it on any level with regards to Juan. I just so many logical reasons why it just doesn't fit. Now, do you pursue it? Do you check in on it? 100%, of course. You'd be foolish not to. But it's what The other thing too. It's got to fit into what the budget is, right? So if they're it just doesn't seem to work the budget because you can't overspend when it comes to that kind of stuff as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
I got a story about overspending, but first, I just think that over the years, historically, whether it comes to applying for a manager's job or checking into a free agent, that if you're the leadoff hitter in either one of those cases, that's not a good sign. I mean, you're the low bar that's being set or the high bar in the case of if the Jays come up with a serious offer for Soto, then Scott Boras can use that and like ratchet up the price of playing poker with Juan Soto with the legitimate, and everybody still believes that either the Mets or the Yankees or the Dodgers will end up with Soto at six. We're 14 years, I think 14 years because he's 25 years old. 14 years, 630
well,
million.
Boris wants to push it past the magic 600 number
Yeah, yeah,
for a
and
lot of reasons.
it's silly. I think even Scott Boras knows that reaching the Ohtani number isn't going to be there because the marketing opportunities,
Right.
the ownership isn't going to be there, which is the only reason that the Blue Jays were involved in the Ohtani sweepstakes because they could make a lot of that, if not all of that money back in Asian marketing opportunities and in endorsements
Well,
and
and he shouldn't probably get
additional
passed on just
broadcasts.
on the notion of playing baseball either. Soto doesn't pitch. So I mean, there's it's the
Yeah,
marketing opportunities and the quality of the player as well. I mean, and Soto's fantastic, but you could argue that alone. So, but yeah, he's going to push this thing past 600 for sure. There's
Yeah,
no question.
and the failure of the pundits in the U.S. is that they don't look into the situation. They don't look into the fact that that 700 or that 600+ million dollar offer that was out there by the Blue Jays, by Rogers ownership, was only because of the business opportunities. So they're all predicting that the Jays are involved because they have all that money that they weren't able to spend on Ohtani. But that's not the truth of the matter. If they had looked a little deeper, they would know that the Jays were only going to spend that money on Ohtani. They were not going to spend it on anyone else. So that even if they don't sign Ohtani, it doesn't mean that there's 630 million to be distributed to the rest of the 40-man
Well,
roster.
and I've been listening, to some things lately, and there's this idea, even in this market, that the Jays actually have access to a separate budget for special cases. Obviously, it's based on a Sotani thing, and I'm like, no, they don't. Like that was a one-off. If
Yeah.
if they had access to this special fund for a Juan Soto, the money would just be in the budget. It would be in the baseball budget. It's so if it's not part of the baseball budget, it has to be this incredibly unique opportunity for a once in a lifetime player that brings X, X,
Well,
X, X beyond baseball.
yeah.
And
And
this
so
character doesn't do it.
you've got the Rogers accountants out there, and they're contributing to the Ohtani situation, but they can't come up with anything for Rogers' business. And they're not baseball fans; they're business fans. They're making money.
Correct.
So if they can't come up with something that involves Soto and maximizing the Caribbean market,
Right.
which is not the same as the Asian and which includes Korea, Japan, everywhere else,
It's
very
different.
lucrative. They can't balance that. And in fact, you have a list of because I mean, the flight to LA by Atkins and Shapiro and whoever else is going out there to negotiate. It doesn't have to be just restricted to Juan Soto. I mean, you have a list of other clients that Boris has that might be useful.
Well, and this is why the trip is extremely important. And for me, that's the purpose of it. Obviously, are they going to check in on Soto? Of course you are. You're going to make, whatever. I don't even know how they can make the pitch. I mean, if Mark could pull that off with Rogers, tip my hat all day long. And hey, anything in this world is possible. I don't see how you can make that pitch. But you go out there because Boris has got 10 other guys that you need to check in on for real because you need to bring one of them home. And I don't mean Friday, but you need to check in on, Bregman and Alonso and Montez and all those other clients, that he has, because Conforto, those guys, like there's a guy that could be a tremendous fit. You know what I mean? And you,
Uh, I
that's
think
the purpose of going, if you're asking me. Like if
Marc Tramuta was in New York when they drafted Conforto, and then the next year he became scouting director. But there's connection, and you have to examine the connections on everyone and every agent and every player. And you mentioned a bunch of names that might be of interest. And to me, if the Blue Jays say, "Hey, we're helping you ratchet up the price on Soto. This is as much as we can spend, and we know that you're going to be able to get higher than that, but we'll give you that offer as legit. If you can come to us, if you run out of options and come back to us, we'll do it. But otherwise, here's some names we're interested in bringing for the 2025 campaign to reload in 6 months that we think can help us, and they're your clients. So let's talk about them while we're here."
and that's the basket they need to be shopping in because it's still you're still in the premium you're not in the bargain bin by any means, and any of those guys that Boris has are still at the high end store, and you need to be shopping there this year if you're Mark and Ross, because you've got 1 year to get this thing back to where it needs to be. So 100% right. So you don't see anybody talking about those players, and that to me is the purpose of this trip. I mean, like you say, here's your offer, Soto. We'll do you a solid,
Yeah,
Scott.
we'll set the bar. Here you go.
We set the bar, but what we really want is to talk about player A, B, and C here because we want one or two of them, if we can fit it into our budget, because that's really going to move the needle for us.
Well, as long as they don't fall victim to, hey, we're close, let's just raise our offer, make that final offer. Because I remember when I was a young PR guy in 1974, and I was looking for an apartment in downtown Montreal, and I had a budget of $150 a month. And I found this place, beauty place, and it was 225. And I said, well, 225, that's not bad. I can afford that. And it was on St. Mark Street. And the selling point was that it was 2 blocks from Crescent Street and 1 block from the Metro.
You
So,
didn't factor in all the other
oh
expenses,
no, I didn't factor, like being two
the
blocks from
entertainment.
Crescent added to the 225 monthly.
That's correct.
But I had my next door neighbor. I was ground floor, so I didn't have to stagger upstairs at 2 in the morning. I was ground floor, but my next door neighbor was a pyromaniac, and he would go out and set fires in the neighborhood. He wore rubber boots. That was the first clue. He wore rubber boots when he left the apartment because he hung around for the firemen. That was his thing.
He was always following the fire trucks, was he?
Yeah, yeah. He wanted to see his work and how it played out, you know?
Right.
But I guess I'm rambling to the point that the Jays need to maintain the status quo in terms of this is our final offer, and don't get sucked into raising that, because, Soto has been to 2 World Series in 6 Major League seasons. That's a good number. But when you would be spending 45 to $50 million on one player, I don't think that 2 out of 6 going to the World Series is going to be possible again, because you don't have the ability to build a bench that can help to get you to the final goal in October. So
No, you can't spend all your money.
It makes no sense for them to sign Juan Soto when they can go after Anthony Santander or Teoscar or Tyler O'Neill or anybody who could be that other corner outfielder.
You can't spend all your money on rent, can you, Griff? You have no money left for
That's
food.
the moral of the story.
Because they've got too many issues to fix. And with all due respect, he's a great player, but he's not going to get it all done for you. You're like you said, I'd rather go out and we've mentioned this before. I'd rather go out and get a Bregman, that even though you may even overpay a little bit for that towards, an extra year on the deal, and it may not be productive, he's going to get you back next year to instant credibility on a corner position. And, you still got some money left to go get, build that bullpen and maybe get a corner outfielder, because that's really, say what you want, the goal is to be in a playoff chase for this team. That
How
because
about
that's the only goal for them, which is sad, but it's the truth.
how about this theory with that I just remembered when you were talking about that? How about this theory that with Matt Hague going to the Pirates and so many of the young Buffalo boys being disciples of Matt Hague, that a couple of them could be packaged to the Pirates, and maybe it's already been discussed that
Sure.
Spencer Horwitz is a big Matt Hague guy, and they had an opening for their hitting coach job. And this guy's not just there for one player. He's a good hitting coach, as we've already discussed. So he goes there. Now you package a couple of guys because the Pirates are looking for young, cheap talent. And then you get one of their lights out relief pitchers. Is Bednar, you know,
Well, and if the Buffalo boys don't scream Pittsburgh Pirate,
yeah, absolutely.
I mean,
I
I
mean,
mean, they all got to follow in the Rowdy Tellez footsteps at some point, because that's just kind of how unfortunately, at least we're talking about the Toronto Blue Jays in this market and not the Pittsburgh Pirates. Imagine
yeah,
that podcast.
in 2019, when it was my first year as PR guy, we were in Pittsburgh, and there were injuries and there were changes and there was starting pitching, but there was a limo service between Buffalo and Pittsburgh that included Marcus Stroman and Anthony Goes, and they were just going back and forth, and a couple of other guys. and like people were getting hurt that one day, and then the limo would turn around and bring them back. I believe that's where Stroh got maybe his first start. So, no, his first start of 29, he was injured or whatever, but yeah. Now, if it was his first start, I wasn't with the Jet. I was just covering,
Right.
but it was just a bizarre 4.5 hour car trip from Buffalo. So there is a connection between Buffalo and Pittsburgh. They're almost as close as Cleveland and Pittsburgh.
Right. That's right. And
But
I mean, there's a strong front office connection there with the Pirates too. So,
oh yeah, Ben
you
Sherrington.
heard it here first. I bet you that deal happens for sure. You're going to see, because, I'm certain when Hague goes there, he's going to scream for a couple of those guys. I mean, it's logical, right? So, I mean, I bet you something does take place in that regard. And that would make some sense if you're both clubs,
So
real club.
we've got awards week coming up with the BBWAA Awards, which are the official ones. There's been other organizations that give out their own awards, but these ones are the official MLB awards. So the award season starts Monday and goes through Thursday. I'm going to read you the candidates, and you tell me who should win or would win. On Monday is and the voting is done. Two members of the BBWA from each city in your league. So
Right.
American League only vote for American League, National League only vote for National League. And it's different writers and columnists, but they're all BBWA members. And so there's no regional bias like there is in the Hall of Fame where you got like 10,000 cadavers living in the New York area who remember Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth and like they hate the young guys now. And 1947 was the end of baseball as they knew it.
Right. Well, there's no, I mean,
The annual awards are legit.
well, they are legit because, in fairness, there used to be a regional East Coast bias, and that is a legit thing. And the reason that was is because, you know, there's only one game a week on television, and
Yeah.
you
No,
know where it
absolutely.
came from. And
Yeah.
even your local teams weren't on TV very much, so it was all radio. So even if the votes were coming from the Midwest, they still had a propensity to the players they saw the most were the
Yeah.
high profile Yankee teams and Red Sox
Yeah.
teams. So it's
And
now that's gone. It's
yeah.
completely gone. There's no
I
coach.
remember I remember the 1969 World Series with the Miracle Mets and Tommy Agee and Ron Swoboda made diving catches in the outfield that everybody said won the World Series. And now you see 10 catches better every night on highlight packages.
Right.
And when I see Swoboda and Agee make those catches in black and white, I go, eh. But
Yeah.
back then it was like stupendous stuff.
Well, it was,
The
but it
same
just didn't
thing
see
with
it.
same thing with nominating and voting for these awards. You see every player every day if they've done something special. So
Right. And there's just no bias anymore. That's for sure.
okay, AL rookie three, and there's three candidates in each. Colton Cowser, Orioles, Luis Hill, Yankees, and Austin Wells, Yankees.
It's got to be heel, whatever you want to say. To me, it is just for the number of starts he put up, and the other two guys obviously had great years, but they're not exceptional seasons. You know what I mean? That I would put him over the guy who showed up and made all those starts and was pretty impressive. For me, it is. But what do you think?
The one guy that I think is missing from that list is Mason Miller, with Oakland. I mean,
For
you
sure.
get a guy throwing 102 and closing out games. And granted, Oakland is not the biggest pressure situation, but his raw skills and his ability to close out games as a rookie, to me, he should have been on that list, maybe even ahead of Austin Wells. But there's that East
It's
Coast
that
bias.
old, we'll talk about it obviously when it gets to the MVP vote. I mean, he's a reliever who doesn't throw a lot of innings, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, Class A made that group with it. How do you feel about that? Do you feel it's warranted to have a guy obviously get an enormous amount of votes for the MVP pitching, however many innings, which wasn't very many in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I used to be more in favor of closers getting MVP votes when it was more than a 3 inning outing, like Bruce Sutter, Mike Marshall when he
Well,
was
yeah.
pitching.
Even
You
Bo
know,
Raleigh Fingers, those
yeah,
guys. I
yeah,
mean,
those guys,
Keith
3 innings
Gossage.
was routine, and then they'd be available the next day as well, which
It's
makes you
unbelievable.
most valuable. Yeah, and
Yeah, it's the
with
Sparky Lyle days, man. I remember that. Like,
all the improvement in like arm care and icing and float pools and you can't pitch 3 days in a row 1 inning if you're a reliever. That's outrageous.
well, when you're gassing yourself as hard as they are, I mean, right. But I agree with you. I think, it's a little false hustle in the old arm care department as far as,
Yeah, they don't.
protecting guys. I don't know. That's
There's some organ like the Dodgers for I don't know why, but their pitchers all get slammed on the IL. There's so many guys during the course of 162 games that are on the IL, and luckily they have enough money and ability to replace their injured pitchers. But that's another thing is Kevin Kiermaier saying how great the Dodgers organization was in preparing the lineup for and then pretty much slamming the Jays and the Rays for not having the same ability to prepare their players. But, in that regard, maybe the Dodgers are also doing something different with their pitchers, which
yeah,
allows for them to
they're
be
putting
on
them
that
on the IL
time. Yeah, yeah,
and going to
absolutely.
get somebody else because they can. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah, it was
If you want to change the game a little bit, Rich, that's one of the things you can do. You can change how people abuse the IL, and I'm not saying everything's abused, but you have little concern for guys blowing themselves out because you can go replace them. So there are things the league could look at to say maybe we should restrict the number of, IL trips, or like we said, increase the length of an IL trip where you have to maybe pull it back a little bit and not encourage your guys. I mean, that's the Tampa Bay Ray way.
yeah,
They just go out and blow guys out, and then they just go get another guy
yeah,
and keep turning it over. They don't care what the name says on the back. And if you restrict that a bit, maybe people change their approach and how they have their pitchers throw. And because right now it's throw as hard as you can for an inning, throw as hard as you can. And, when the real thing is when you blow yourself out, we'll just replace you.
yeah.
That's,
I got
that's
an
really how it
exercise.
works.
I got an exercise for us for next week's podcast. Is let's go individually, and myself, and we'll go and make a 26-man roster off of the free agent list
Okay.
and compare them. Like, because you could have an expansion team of current free agents, and we won't go on price. It won't matter what price, and we'll compare your team and my team. But when people say, "Oh, how are they going to rebuild the bullpen?" That's one area. I think there was 58 to 60 relievers with major league experience who are out there. You just have to make the right choices. And the
Right.
Jays have not been able to do that as much as they would hope.
Well, and sometimes they have, but I mean, it is a bit of a crapshoot. And unfortunately, last year, a lot of crap in the shooting. You know what I mean? That's just
Yeah.
kind of how it ended up. I mean, you do with a bullpen, sometimes the approach, because you got a million guys that throw 97, is see what sticks. There is a level of that. But I mean, obviously, they've got to go out this year and get some higher percentage chance guys that are going to be good, and they're out there to get.
I, I think in August and September last year, it was just like Ross would go home, put his feet up, and turn on his TV and stream the waiver wire. It's like,
Well,
do we like him? Do we like him? Do we like him? And they'd come up with a guy, Brett DeGuice. What? But
I just assume that's always the approach.
okay, okay. National League rookie Jackson Trio, Jackson Merrill, Paul Skeens.
I think it's going to be Skeens. I don't think there's any question, but I think there is a question. I mean, there's a few guys that could have been there. You know what I mean? But it's going to come down to Merrill and Skeens. I don't think there's any question.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
Churio, I don't know why he's there.
Merrill would be my choice, but just because
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Just because from day one he was there, overperforming, making the transition from shortstop to center field, and leading that team when other people were struggling.
Okay. It's going to be Skeens. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
agree with that.
yeah.
But how about leaving off Imanaga from the Cubs, who was like the phenom of the first part, even though he's like in the mid 20s or
Well,
20.
he didn't make, I actually have him written down for Cy Young,
Yeah,
right? He's
yeah.
not on the list. And that's what I was going to ask you. Maybe we'll just get right into that. Is Skeens obviously is on that list as well, right?
Yeah, it's Skeens, Wheeler, and Sale.
Like, what, I mean, I mean, I love the guy. He was clearly dominant, but should you be voted that high when you don't have enough innings to qualify for the ERA
Well,
title?
that
You know what I
that
mean?
that's my problem with Skeens in both regards. I mean, he was brought up later, had great stuff. I mean, it's just awesome.
Indisputable.
Yeah.
Indisputable. Yeah.
But in terms of 2024, when you're looking at rookie and Cy, I would look at people who were more qualified with more impact in 2024. And to have impact on a team that finished last in your division is not, and you only came up in mid-May, late May.
I just have a hard time seeing a guy, potentially win a Cy Young with 130 innings. I mean, as great as they were, you know what I mean? That's just, I think you, people got a little carried away with just, I don't know, the pub he was getting for, I mean, and like I say, his
So,
outings were fantastic, but you throw on another 60 innings, then what happens? We
yeah.
don't know. We
Yeah,
don't know.
absolutely. Right. Because they
And other
wouldn't have
guys
let him
did
pitch
it.
another 60 innings. I mean, they brought him up at a certain time
That's
because they
right.
weren't going to let him go the distance and qualify. Because
Right.
they're,
He wasn't going to get those
yeah.
innings in. So that's
So, since we already read that list off, who would your side be? Sale
yeah,
over
absolutely.
Wheeler and Skeens?
Yeah, yeah, and I do think you take it. I know it's silly, but I think there's a bit of where Sale came from too that pushes it a little even
Yeah,
higher
yeah,
for
for
me.
sure. But the fact that he came from there and took the ball every 5 days and
100%.
was impressive, and you know pretty much carried the Braves to the postseason.
No
Should
question.
carry that sigh. When I'll go backwards again because Tuesday is the manager. AL, it's AJ Hinch, Matt Quatrero, Stephen Vogt. Um, and all three teams came from the AL Central, and all three teams had 13 games against the White Sox. So I would discount that. I would look for a manager from outside that division, but I can't, and not including John Schneider, but for some reason, it's not his time yet. His
He
time will.
must have finished fourth.
Yeah, he must have finished fourth. But among those three guys, I think I would take Stephen Vogt just because they weren't predicted to win the division, which they did. And they had some pitching injuries, which he overcame, and their offense wasn't as good as some of the others.
I agree. They excelled more than the others in my I mean, obviously usually I wouldn't be surprised if Hinch won it just because of the finish they had, and that
Yeah.
sometimes is top of mind when it's September.
Well, but that
Um,
was such an unplanned for finish because they got rid of veterans at the All-Star break and then they got their shortstop hurt, which was the key to turning it
yes,
around.
yes, yes.
And, and like so they weren't planning on competing like they did. Only Tarek Skubal is great, and some of their young hitters came through. But I think even AJ Hinch at the trade deadline thought, okay, we'll just play as hard as we can down the
Right.
stretch, and then boom, all of a sudden, 8 wins in a row over the White Sox, and there you are.
You're in the race. We're going to the postseason, boys. That's right.
The NL manager is going to be a very tough decision. You got Pat Murphy, Mike Schilt, and Carlos Mendoza. I mean, you got the Mets and the Padres
I just don't
and
know
the
how you
Brewers.
go with a guy with a $300 million payroll. I mean, that's great. Sorry, the Mets. I mean,
Yeah.
I get it. And not to say a great job wasn't done. I mean, you know, with the exceptional bench coach they got too, it's
Yeah,
hard to argue that. But for me, it's probably
yeah.
Murphy. Yeah,
Friend of the program.
friend of the program, supporter of the
John
program.
Gibbons.
That's
But Carlos Mendoza, to me, because you talk about the $300 million, he's like that sprinter on the warning track who races as a fan and gives him a head start. Like he's dressed all in latex and he races around and
the
he's a
flash there. Yeah.
yeah, the Flash. And he comes up and just before the finish line he passes and everybody goes, "Oh, isn't he great?" No, he's a
He was supposed to
professional.
be there. He
He's
was
supposed.
supposed to be there.
So who's your guy then?
Murphy, I think, with the Brewers.
Murphy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's another program that was supposed to sort of be fighting with the Dodgers, and they ended up at the end doing that.
Right.
But they were supposed to be there.
Yeah. No,
And,
I think
yeah.
Murphy's the
I'd
guy.
love to see Murphy win it, but I have a feeling Schilt will win it.
Yeah. Yeah. You're probably right. But
Yeah. So Cy Young is next Wednesday, and all of these are occurring before our next show. So, like our NFL picks, we'll be able to say whether we got them right or wrong.
right.
But we're
Right.
not putting money on this.
That's right. That's right.
Cy Young, and we've talked about NL already. AL is Tarek Skubal, Seth Lugo, and Emmanuel Clase.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not voting for Scooble, I assume you're voting for Class A if
Yeah,
you're a voter because you're debating, because I mean, and I think Lugo should be there, to be honest with you. I love the season he had, but I mean, Scooble is the guy. He's thrown the innings, he dominated. Class A obviously was the reliever who absolutely dominated. So if you're going to give credibility to that, sure, it's one of the two. You know what I mean
yeah.
for me. So.
Well, a guy that I thought statistically should have been on the list as Seattle's Logan Gilbert.
Yeah.
He had like huge strikeout numbers. He was over 200 innings pitched. The only problem was that he was playing for a shitty offense, and I think he was 9-12 or 9-14, and you can't for a starting pitcher, it's kind of hard. I know that's old school to say you
Yeah, I
can't.
don't know if people even look at that as a voter anymore.
King Felix
King
broke that
Felix,
streak when he was 12
500,
or
whatever.
12 and 11,
Yeah, it
and
was like 500 basically.
yeah, that was the first time analytics really reared its ugly head.
Right. How dare they
Yeah.
look at
So,
other things than pitcher victories?
so
Right.
then Thursday is the MVP award, and this when you're a voter, and that used to be my vote when I was with the Star,
Yeah.
that you choose 10. And usually 1 to 5 are easy and but not necessarily in terms of the order. But 6 to 10 is very difficult because it's all subjective at that point. Is it your team winning or is it you being one of the more talented guys? So that works against Vlad in terms of this season. I don't think he was even top 5, even though his numbers. I mean, he won a lot of awards like Silver Slugger for first base or whatever. But the AL nominees, it's hard to argue with Bobby Witt Jr., Aaron Judge, and Juan Soto.
Right.
Although two guys from the same team is difficult, when you don't win the World Series. But but yeah, those two guys, I have trouble arguing with that. I mean, Yordan Alvarez might have been a choice, Vlad, Jose Ramirez with Cleveland. But among the three that were nominated, who do you think?
Well, I think it's going to be a runaway with Aaron Judge. I mean,
You think unanimous?
yeah, I think, well, no, I don't think it's going to be unanimous, but close.
I think a couple of Midwest
Yeah,
votes might
yeah,
go.
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah,
And hey, I don't think it's completely unreasonable
yeah,
either.
because
It's like the National League one with talk about that with Lindor. I mean, you can make a strong case. Like the guy plays shortstop, and I
yeah,
think that's really gets overlooked. We can argue about WAR and its validity and how it's, but regardless, when you play a premium defensive position, I'm not sure it gets the credit or weighted enough in these votes.
yeah.
You
And to
give me
me,
that.
to me, the Bobby Witt argument would be that you got two other nominees on the same team and they might split. They're not going to split first place,
Right.
but because some voters might say, "Oh, well, it took both of them to win two more games than the Royals won," or whatever the total was. But I think that might play into Bobby Witt at least getting one or two.
Yeah, I think he does too. That's why I agree. It's not unanimous.
So the NL, I mean, Shohei Ohtani, I would never, when I was voting, I never voted for DH. I couldn't stand it because if
And
you're
that's
paying,
what I
if
mean.
you're paying $300 for a Dodgers ticket, and this guy sticks his head out of the dugout for five at bats, and you don't see him in the field any other time, and if he gets on base twice, you might see him over the course of 3 hours for 10 minutes.
Well, what's more important? And again, Shohei's running away with this thing. But if you chose Lindor first, I'm not arguing with you. What's more important, 50 stolen bases or a billion innings at shortstop?
Yeah,
You know what I mean? But we get caught up on those numbers, those stolen base totals, the home run totals. But dudes out there playing 9 innings
yeah.
defensively,
But
making a difference. So I'm not going to argue with people who justify Lindor as their vote if they did
yeah,
that.
for the sake of transparency, even though I dislike the concept of voting for the DH, I would have voted for Shohei Ohtani because his numbers are just,
They're gaudy. They're
yeah.
gaudy
But
for
he's not
sure.
going to steal 50 bases anymore because of what happened to him in the World Series with his shoulder and the fact that he's going to be back pitching again. I think they'll cut down on his aggressiveness the day before he pitches, the day that he pitches, the day after he pitches, which only leaves 3 more days. So,
You think so, eh?
yeah, I
And
think he's
you think,
aggressive on the bases.
but you think he will do that? I mean,
Yeah,
when the juices get
yeah.
flowing and you're
No,
standing on
he
base.
proved his point. He
Yeah,
proved his point that
he sure did.
Japanese are faster than we think they are.
And taller.
And dollar, yeah. So NL, the other ones, of course, are Francisco Lindor and then Ketel Marte, which I thought was a vodka that I used to drink back in the 70s. So
It could have been.
it could have been as I stumbled past the
I
pyromania.
think I think you also voted that third a few times back in the day as well. The vodka of your choice.
Through that.
Funny how that made the list.
Yeah. Now I think that's about the end of that discussion, and we'll review it next Thursday when we they won't have announced the MVP yet, but we'll review it when we record next week. But in terms of the rookie, I thought that the NL rookie, I thought that Imanaga should have been on that for
Yeah,
sure.
me too. I
Yeah.
had noted. Yeah.
So I think we're pretty much done. Oh, Bo, let's talk about Bo and then do the NFL.
Okay.
All right, Bo. Now I put a list together of
You did.
teams of shortstops
You did.
that Bo would not replace if he went to those teams. And let me briefly read it. I'll
Yeah,
read
let me
it
look that up.
quickly. I think people know. He would not replace at shortstop Volpe, Witt Jr., Gunnar Henderson, Jeremy Pena, Ezekiel Tovar, Francisco Lindor, Dansby Swanson, Mason Wynn, Brian Rocchio, and for various reasons. I mean, cost and defensive ability for some of these guys. Like Rocchio is a good young player who is the future of their shortstop position in Cleveland, I believe. C.J. Abrams, um, Kim is a free agent. Trey Turner, Seager, O'Neill Cruz, Correa, Trevor Story. Maybe he could replace Trevor Story. Yeah,
I,
probably.
I could replace Trevor
Yeah,
Story right now. So sorry,
yeah,
Griff.
but Trevor
I'm not.
Story
He
replaced
doesn't even play shortstop anymore.
Trevor Story replaced Tulowitzki. Like
Yeah.
he's not a schlub.
Well, he is now, I think.
Oh, okay. Well,
But
he's been
and
hurt.
and we could debate how great he was in that park, anyways. But
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Okay, so I'll scratch him off my
yeah,
list.
yeah, scratcher for
Okay.
those.
So, like the market for Bo Bichette to me as a shortstop does not equal the market for Vlad going somewhere else. But you have a defensive Bo in terms of value that I would like to hear.
Well, I think correct. If you're looking at those guys, you're probably going to say, yeah, I wouldn't go out and get him to replace those guys. But his value here and his value in this market and his value as a player to me is very high. I think we're all stuck on what we saw from Bo Bichette last year. And fair enough. I think there's a lot of reasons why he didn't have such a great year, and he didn't, even getting out of the chute. But to me, Bo is an extremely valuable player who you'll see at the top of the hit leader chart, like he has been most of his career, and I expect him to be there again. To me, he's a premium player in this league. Now, is he a premium defender? No, he isn't. But is he good enough to win with? I think 100% he is. And I think as a Toronto Blue Jay, it's imperative for a lot of reasons that he remained the Blue Jay. And I think that ship has sailed. But I think Bo Bichette is a gamer who's a winner and a guy that you stick at the top of the lineup who's going to give you 200 hits for a lot more years. And even guys on that list aren't going to do that. A lot of them. Are they better defenders? Sure. I'm going to tell you right now, I think I'd rather have Bo Bichette than Anthony Volpe. I just would. I
Yeah.
mean, we can go over them one at a time, and you disagree probably, but Bo Bichette is a hell of a ball player.
No,
And he
I,
doesn't have a market right now because
yeah,
of for a couple of reasons.
I'm a Bo supporter. I'm just looking at it from the outside with teams that do have those shortstops, and would they be coveting Bo, not having seen him play for the last 5 years? And I agree with you. I mean, when somebody has a fifth season in the major leagues and post terrific numbers, everybody goes, well, he's finally arrived. It's a breakout. But when you have a bad season after 4 brilliant years, people don't give you any respect in that regard. They just say, oh, he's done. He's on his way down. He's 26 years old.
And that's my point. Hey, I understand. And if I'm Bo Bichette, you're in a play for it year. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? You're in a year where you got to put up some numbers because he wants to be a shortstop because for a
Yeah.
couple of reasons. That's just the premium position, and two, that's where you get paid. You know what I mean? More. And there's just at this point with the Jays, they missed the boat on signing him, and now you got to wait anyways because I mean
Yeah.
he's as good as gone as far as the problem is you can't. He had a bad year. What's his value? And letting him walk is the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
simple.
This is not the time for him to be traded by the Jays or for him to want to be traded to work on a new contract. I mean, there are a couple of things that played into his down year this year, his worst season, is because since 2019, since his rookie season, they have been contending. They have needed his leadership in the clubhouse. They have needed him to step up and show the work ethic and what he brings to the table. And this year was a disaster. So that's the first year as a 26-year-old that his team has uh, achieved failure. And so he had to learn how to handle it. The other thing with Bo is that he had 4 hitting coaches, and he's his own hitting coach, and his dad is a hitting coach. So that's 6 hitting coaches. And there were times during the season, and especially just before he got hurt, he was he was doing the high leg kick, which is not his control swing. He was doing it on strike two. With strike two, he was going high leg kick. And then later on, when he came back the first time, he was doing everything toe to heel. He was
Right.
doing his 2 strike approach on every pitch. He has to go back to what made him successful as a 200 hit per year hitter.
Yeah,
And
because
he
it's
was
natural
confused.
ability. Right.
He was confused. He was talking with Matt Hague. He was talking with Guillermo. He was probably talking with 5 or 6 guys internally.
Correct.
And then his dad would get on the phone probably with him and say, "Hey, I was watching on TV and this is what you
No
need."
doubt. No doubt.
So, like, just one off season offensively, given the circumstances of the team and its performance, I think, like you, that he's going to have a really good 2025 season and set himself up for either a long-term extension with the Jays, which is less likely, or free agency with one of those teams that has a shortstop. Because the other teams that I didn't put on that list of shortstops that would not that he would not replace, probably a lot of them can't afford what Bo is going to be charging. So,
Right, right. So that
his
takes some
market
money
isn't
out.
as big as he might think it is, and he'll find that out, which might give the Blue Jays a chance to compete, unlike Juan Soto, where, where he's not going to be asking, it's too early to say what Bo as a free agent in 2025 after the 25 season could be asking for. It's too early to even guess. And that's all it would be right now is a guess.
It is a guess, unfortunately. And I think, the real critique though is the fact that it's at this point. I mean, with Bo and Vladdy, like I said before, it can't get to this point. It just can't get there. You've got to have this information, either the player locked up or you've moved on, because that asset starts to devalue when you can't sign him and he gets closer to free agency. And both guys don't have the value in this final year, of team
Yeah.
control that they would have had when you knew you couldn't get these guys signed. And it became unlikely that you were going to find an agreement somehow. Here we are. Unfortunately for Bo, it's hurt him too because he had a bad year. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that mark,
And
but I mean, you
another factor, a third factor,
get to this point, and you can't
yeah.
do, you can't.
A third factor was just observing Bo in the clubhouse, and he didn't have his buddies Santiago Espinal. He didn't have friends around him. Nobody looked to him for that leadership role that we were talking about, and it was a different atmosphere just surrounding Bo's locker. And Bo is one who sits at his locker a lot of the time, and just the traffic that would come by in the past was you would make you smile. Just a number of people would come and talk to Bo. But it didn't happen this year for whatever reason. Probably the fact that it was a 74 win team and they knew it early on in the season that they were not going to compete. But and then all the veterans got shipped out at the trade deadline, which sort of
And
was the final nail in the non-competitive coffin.
my impression too of Bo is that when things are going well and he's going well, he's a leader. And and
Well,
when they're not, I think his impact is probably negative.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Because
that
that's
yeah,
how much
it,
of a
it
red
it
app
doesn't go down to flatline; it goes to negative.
that goes to
Yeah,
negative.
yeah,
That's my impression, and that's, you know what I mean? That's the downside
yeah, yeah.
of that.
But
The,
at least they had the fortitude to sign him for those 3 years, and it's not going to be an off season of negotiation and vitriol between the club and the player because he's already signed to his
yep, yep,
$17 million
they
a year,
avoided
which
that.
sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is what it would be anyways.
All right, so let's get to NFL and wrap this up.
All right.
Last week you were 2-1,
Yes. On
and
the
put you at 4-8 for the year.
5 and 8. Relax.
Five. No, there's
No,
only
5 and 7.
five
Five.
and seven.
Yeah,
Five
like,
and seven, and I was 3-0,
let's go to the
which
spreadsheet, I
puts
think.
me to 8-4.
Right.
So
All right. You cash and checks, Rich.
yeah, yeah. Asking questions later. Here we
Yeah,
go.
that's right.
So you go first, and I'll follow up, and then you go second, and then we'll do our three picks and sign off.
Okay. Pick number one. I'm going to those Indianapolis Colts with the return of Anthony Richardson. They're at those New York Football Jets, and they're getting 4 points. I think you're going to see a little different Anthony Richardson. I mean, he is what he is, and I'm not sure what you're going to get from the Jets, but I'm hoping it's more of an implosion. Uh, so I think this is going to be. I think that the Colts going to win the game actually, but I'll take the points at 4.
Yeah, for the Jets, it seems like every huddle produces a Hail Mary.
Right,
Please, please let
right.
this play work.
No
But
fault.
I mean, it worked. The Anthony Richardson return worked for Carolina. They brought their guy back and they won, I think, 2 games in a row, right? Pretty much.
Shocking. Yeah.
So my first is the Denver Broncos at home, giving 2.5. to the Falcons. I think at the best of times, Kirk Cousins has trouble breathing at sea level, and now he's going to be mile high. I think that Denver needs to prove a point and get back in the race. They have what can be competitive for a wild card, and I'm taking them, giving less than a field goal to Atlanta, who is not playing as well as they did earlier.
So there's no hangover from the blocked kick for the Broncos, is there?
No, that's where you need to prove that that was just a aberration.
All right. I'm going to take the Los Angeles Rams -4.5 at New England. I think the Rams didn't look so great against the Dolphins, and New England obviously grinded out a victory in Chicago last week. I think the Rams are just exceptionally more talented, and I think they're still fighting hard, and I think you're going to see them put up a bunch of points and find Stafford to find a way to get the ball to the receivers here and win comfortably.
Yeah, I'll buy that.
Okay.
Critics are saying that the Rams are slow on offense. I think that is because Cooper Kupp is white. That's just my observation. Um,
And maybe it's a fair comment.
my second pick is the Cleveland's over New Orleans, getting 1 point in New Orleans. And my thing is that Jameis Winston, I know he's got a lot of revenge all over football because he's been in a lot of places. But this is Jameis Winston gives the Browns their best chance to win. And I think that going back to New Orleans where he played and was sort of disrespected will give him that opportunity. And I'm big on revenge and I'm big on all
You're big
those.
on narratives, Griff. You're
Yeah,
big
yeah,
on
yeah,
narratives.
yeah.
You
So
made a career out of it, for Christ's sakes.
yeah, I never thought of it that way. Can
That's
you,
right.
can I book an hour with you? Do you have a
Yes,
sofa?
you just did.
Oh, okay.
I like it. My last one is going to be the San Francisco 49ers -6.5 versus Seattle. I think they start to get rolling here and become a major player in the NFL towards the end of the year. And Seattle's not very good. They're just not. And Geno's not very good, if you ask me. They make some plays, but um, I think this one could get ugly. So I'm going to go with the Niners -6.5 for my I'm on the rise, so I'm expecting 3 wins out of these. So no,
So you've gone from Russell not very good to Geno's not very good.
that's right. I
Yeah.
think it's a Seattle thing.
So
Still
are you
play
done
out there.
explaining that? That's not, I mean, they got as long as they keep Debo and the long snapper apart, San Francisco should be all right.
Apparently, it's the lack of respect for long snappers.
My third and final one is Miami Dolphins at home, giving 7.5 to Las Vegas Raiders. And I think that the shine has come off of the Raiders and their new coach. Well, he's not no longer new; it's a year and a half.
That's right.
And I think that Miami, with Tua sticking his head in there on a tackle to show that he's okay, I think that they're
That's the way to do it, right? Look, guys, I'm fine.
like Randy Johnson sticking his hand in an anthill to
Right.
to win $100 bet at spring training. But he's smart enough; he put his right hand in there,
But fair enough. Fair
and
enough.
he won the $100, which I
And he
get.
won the $100. So I mean, who are we to argue?
So Miami, I think, is on the way back. They got like wideouts that are unparalleled in the NFL right now, and they got a couple of running backs who do the job. And if Tua's there, and the defense played as well as I can remember the Miami defense playing in a long time. So if they're going to make a run for the postseason in a division where there's only one good team at this point, which is Buffalo. I think that they can start this week and they'll run it up against the Raiders and there you go.
There you go. I I, I like the pick. I mean,
So
can't argue with
we will
your
do that.
prognostication.
We will review that next week and we will also
We'll talk
talk
about the
about
big,
free agent
yeah,
free agent well free agent all-star or free agent 26-man rosters. And we'll talk about the trip if there are any
Or
details.
maybe we'll be talking about the big Juan Soto signing. So,
Yeah, yeah. Let's
he's
not
coming back on the
get ahead of the
flight.
horse here.
Finally, a year later.
Yeah. So anyway, that does it for episode 44. And if you want to catch up on all the past exit philosophies or on the columns that I've written over the last little while, go to griffsthepitch.com and they're all available. And don't be afraid to like and subscribe and become a paid subscriber. So we will talk to you next week. And we enjoyed this and a lot of material for November. And it'll keep coming. It seems like that is going to be a busy off season for the Blue Jays and for
It is.
baseball.
Yeah. We're going to
And
have lots to talk about. So that's
thanks
exciting.
for joining me, Mal, as co-host for the fourth week in a row.
Is that it? I think it's more,
Well,
isn't it?
fifth week in a row because I'll use the NFL to keep track of how many weeks it is
That's
because we
right.
do 3 a
That's
week.
no, 6 because we skipped one.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, holy
I
moly.
mean,
Yeah.
that's old hat by now.
Anyway, appreciate it and appreciate everyone listening or watching on YouTube. And we will see you next week.